Marcus Webb was having the worst month of his life, and today was about to make it even worse. He pushed through the crowded doors of the orbital auction house, sweat already forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. The room was packed with salvage dealers, scrap merchants, and opportunistic traders, all the vultures who made their living picking apart the bones of dead starships. Marcus was one of them, though not a very successful one. Lot 47, sold to Craxus Mining Consortium for 18,000 credits. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the hall. Marcus checked his tablet and cursed under his breath. Lot 47 had been a decent haul, engine components from a retired transport vessel. He'd planned to bid on that, but his shuttle had broken down on the way to the station, and by the time he'd hitched a ride on a cargo hauler, half the auction was already done. He squeezed between two large Thorian merchants, their blue scales gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They didn't even glance at him. Nobody ever paid much attention to Marcus. He was just another struggling human trying to make ends meet in the vast machinery of galactic commerce. Lot 48, medical equipment from the hospital ship Mercy's Dawn. Starting bid, 5,000 credits. Marcus didn't even bother raising his hand. He had exactly 743 credits to his name. That was supposed to last him another 2 months until his creditors came calling. He'd borrowed money 6 months ago to buy what he'd thought was a salvage gold mine, a crashed probe full of rare metals. It had turned out to be worthless junk. Now the creditors' guild was breathing down his neck, and if he didn't come up with at least 3,000 credits by next month, they'd seize his salvage license. Without that license, Marcus was finished. He'd end up working waste reclamation on some outer rim station, spending the rest of his life cleaning air filters. Lot 51 sold. Every item that might have given him a chance went to dealers with deeper pockets and better connections. Finally, after 2 hours of standing and watching his hopes die, the auctioneer cleared his throat in a different way. The tone was almost apologetic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final lot today, Lot 53. The vessel was at least 800 meters long, with the distinctive angular design of collective military architecture. Its dark hull was covered in blast scoring and meteor impacts. This is the Dominion's crown," the auctioneer continued. "A collective heavy cruiser, confiscated under the terms of the recent peace treaty. The vessel was found drifting in unclaimed space and has been officially surveyed by government inspectors. Even the scrap metal alone could be worth tens of thousands of credits, but then he noticed something strange. The experienced dealers around him weren't moving. In fact, they were leaving. The Thorian merchants pushed past him toward the exit. A human woman with cybernetic implants shook her head and walked away. Within 30 seconds, half the auction hall had emptied. Marcus turned to an older man standing nearby, a centauri with gray skin and tired eyes. "Why is everyone leaving?" The collective stripped everything valuable before they abandoned it. Weapons, engines, navigation systems, life support, even the wall panels. There's nothing left but an empty hull. You can read it yourself. They spent 2 weeks going through that vessel with scanners. Not a single salvageable component. It's just a big metal shell floating in space. The Centauri patted Marcus on the shoulder. "Save your credits, friend. That cruiser is worthless." As stated, this vessel has been thoroughly surveyed. All valuable systems and components have been removed. The hull itself is structurally sound, but would require significant investment to make space-worthy again. We're offering this lot as is, with no warranty or guarantees. Maybe it was the crushing weight of his debts, or maybe it was just the stubborn part of his brain that hated seeing everyone else give up. He'd heard stories about his great-grandfather, who'd fought in the last war against the Vraxian pirates. The old man had a saying, "When everyone's running away from something, that's when you should take a closer look." There were maybe 10 people left and none of them moved. Marcus looked at his tablet again. 743 credits. If he bid 500, he'd have 243 left. That wasn't enough to live on for a week, let alone 2 months. This was insane. The ship was worthless, everyone said so. But what if they were wrong? What if the surveyors had missed something? 500 credits, the auctioneer repeated. Do I hear 500? His brain was screaming at him to stop, but his mouth was already opening. 500, he called out. Every head in the room turned to look at him. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, then quickly recovered his professional composure. We have 500 credits. Do I hear 600? Lot 53 goes to bidder 379 for 500 credits. The auction house clerk handed him a datapad with the ship's registration codes and coordinates. Congratulations, the clerk said with barely hidden sarcasm. You're now the proud owner of 800 meters of empty metal. The ship is currently in parking orbit around the station. You have 30 days to move it or pay storage fees. When you're done with your amazing investment, I've got a bridge to sell you. The pilot, a bored-looking human woman, raised an eyebrow when she saw the destination. The collective cruiser. You actually bought that thing. Through the viewport, Marcus watched the Dominion's crown grow larger and larger. Up close, it was even more intimidating than in the pictures. The ship was massive, scarred by battle, its dark hull absorbing light like a hungry void. The pilot docked at one of the airlocks. You've got 2 hours, she said. After that, I'm charging waiting fees. The corridor stretched ahead of him, bare metal walls stripped of every panel, every wire, every component. His footsteps echoed in the hollow silence. Emergency lighting flickered weakly, powered by some backup system the collective had apparently missed. He walked slowly through the ship, his scanner in hand, checking for anything of value. The scanner showed nothing. Room after room, corridor after corridor, all empty. This was it. This was his big investment. 200 meters of stripped hull that he couldn't afford to move and couldn't afford to scrap. Marcus sat down on the bare floor and put his head in his hands. He'd just thrown away his last hope. But then his scanner beeped. He looked down at the device. The reading made no sense. According to the scanner, there was an energy signature somewhere below him, deep in the ship's core. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was definitely there. Marcus stood up slowly, his heart beginning to race. The surveyors had spent 2 weeks examining this ship with professional equipment. They'd found nothing, but his cheap, second-hand scanner had just detected something they'd missed. He looked down the empty corridor, toward the depths of the ship, and allowed himself the smallest smile. Maybe this wasn't the worst investment ever after all. Marcus spent 3 days inside the Dominion's crown, and each day made him more confused. The energy signature was real. His scanner detected it clearly now that he'd calibrated the device properly. But finding the source was like searching for a whisper in a cathedral. The ship was enormous, and the signal seemed to move every time he got close. On the first day, he'd explored the upper decks. Empty crew quarters stretched for hundreds of meters. The collective had even taken the beds and furniture. All that remained were mounting brackets on the walls and floors, like the bones of some ancient creature. On the second day, Marcus went deeper. He found the gutted bridge, the stripped engineering bay, and the hollow cargo holds. Everywhere he looked, he saw the same thing, absolute, complete emptiness. Whatever the collective hadn't taken, they'd destroyed. This wasn't just salvage. This was erasure. By the third day, Marcus was running out of food and patience. His 243 credits had bought him some ration bars and water recycling tablets, but not much else. The shuttle pilot had stopped waiting after the first day. Now Marcus was living on the ship, sleeping in his emergency suit because there was no life support. He sat in what used to be the captain's ready room, eating a tasteless ration bar and staring at his scanner. The energy signature was stronger here, much stronger. According to the readings, the source was directly below him, maybe 50 meters down, but there was nothing below the captain's ready room except solid deck plating. He'd checked the ship's schematics, old collective military diagrams he'd downloaded from public databases. There were no rooms, no corridors, nothing in that space. Marcus finished his ration bar and stood up. His legs ached from 3 days of walking. His back hurt from sleeping on metal floors. His creditors would start calling in 2 weeks, and here he was, alone on a dead ship, chasing a phantom energy reading. He was about to give up when he noticed something odd about the wall. The lighting in the ready room was dim, powered by those same emergency systems. But in one corner, the shadows fell wrong. There was a slight depression in the metal, barely visible, like the wall had been damaged and poorly repaired. Marcus approached the depression and ran his hand across it. The metal felt different here, newer, less weathered. He pulled out a small prying tool from his belt and tapped the wall. The sound was hollow. His heart started beating faster. He tapped again, moving along the wall. Solid, 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 hollow, hollow, solid. There was a space behind this wall. A space that wasn't on any schematic. Marcus worked the prying tool into a seam he could barely see. The metal resisted at first, then suddenly gave way with a grinding screech. A panel fell inward, revealing darkness beyond. Cool air rushed out, carrying a strange metallic smell. Marcus's scanner went crazy, beeping wildly as the energy signature jumped in intensity. He'd found it. Marcus climbed through the opening, using his suit's headlamp to light the way. The space beyond was a narrow corridor, no more than a meter wide, leading downward at a steep angle. The walls here weren't stripped. They were covered in some kind of dark material that absorbed his light. He descended carefully, one hand on the wall for balance. The corridor twisted and turned, clearly designed to be hidden. After several minutes, it opened into a chamber. The chamber was circular, about 10 meters across, and unlike anything else on the ship, it was intact. In the center stood a cylindrical structure, 3 meters tall and glowing with soft blue light. Cables ran from its base into the floor, pulsing with energy. Marcus approached slowly, his scanner practically screaming warnings about unknown technology. The cylinder's surface was covered in symbols he didn't recognize, not collective script, but something older, more complex. He circled the structure, looking for any kind of interface. On the far side, he found a panel with a hand-shaped depression. It seemed to be an activation mechanism. This was stupid. This was incredibly stupid. Unknown alien technology on a derelict military vessel, hidden in a secret chamber. Every safety protocol Marcus had ever learned told him to back away and call experts. But experts cost money he didn't have, and this might be his only chance to salvage something valuable from his disastrous investment. Marcus took a deep breath and placed his hand on the panel. The cylinder exploded with light. Holographic displays erupted from the structure, filling the entire chamber. Symbols, diagrams, and text flooded the air around him in brilliant blue and white. The text was in that same strange script, flowing across the displays faster than Marcus could follow. His translation device, a cheap universal model clipped to his collar, started beeping. It struggled to process the language, throwing up error messages and partial translations. Marcus stood frozen, surrounded by thousands of holographic pages, watching information cascade around him. Slowly, the translation device began making sense of the text. Words appeared on his visor display. Archive, accessed, authorization, unknown, warning. Collective security, compromised. Marcus saw labels appearing in translated text. This was a database, a massive, comprehensive database of failures. He reached out and touched one of the holographic displays. It expanded, showing detailed reports of a military engagement. The collective fleet had attacked a world called Threnody Prime. The defending species, the Threnody, had used guerrilla tactics and knowledge of their planet's magnetic fields to destroy 3 collective cruisers. Eventually, the collective had won through sheer numbers, but the victory had cost them dearly. Marcus touched another display. This one showed a species called the Carthan who developed biological weapons, specifically designed to target collective physiology. The collective had eventually integrated the Carthan into their society, but only after losing an entire invasion force. Display after display, report after report, hundreds of them, thousands of them. Every single one documented a collective military defeat or setback. Marcus's mind raced. The collective was the dominant power in the galaxy. Everyone knew that. They controlled hundreds of star systems and had absorbed dozens of species into their society. They were technologically superior, militarily unstoppable, and politically untouchable. But this archive told a different story. This archive showed that the collective had been challenged, defeated, and forced to retreat countless times throughout their history. Why would they keep records like this? And more importantly, why would they hide them? Marcus spent hours going through the data, his translation device slowly improving its understanding of the ancient language. He learned that this archive was old, thousands of years old. It predated the current collective government by millennia. The archive documented something called pre-integration conflicts, military campaigns against species the collective had eventually absorbed into their society. But the documentation was meticulous, almost obsessive. It cataloged every tactical mistake, every strategic failure, every weakness the collective had shown. This wasn't a trophy collection. This was a warning system. Whoever created this archive wanted future generations to remember that the collective wasn't invincible. As the hours passed, Marcus noticed a pattern. Most species in the archive had followed similar trajectories. First, they'd resisted the collective militarily. They'd fought hard, sometimes winning significant battles. But eventually, the collective's superior numbers and resources wore them down. Then came Phase 2. The collective would offer peace terms, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. Slowly, over decades or centuries, the resistant species would be absorbed into collective society. Their warriors would become collective soldiers. Their leaders would become collective administrators. Their identity would fade into the larger whole. 37 species had followed this pattern. 37 species that had fought and lost and eventually ceased to exist as independent civilizations. But there was one entry that was different. Marcus found it by accident, searching through the database for recent entries. Most of the archive was ancient, but this entry was only 200 years old. The designation read, Species Classification, the persistent ones, Status, Unresolved, Protocol, Quarantine Active. Earth, Marcus sat down hard, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He read through the entry 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding something, but the translation was clear. The collective had made contact with Earth in 1823, not peaceful contact, military contact. They'd come to integrate humanity like they'd integrated everyone else, and humanity had fought back. According to the archive, human resistance had been fierce and utterly unexpected. The collective had expected an easy victory against a species that hadn't even developed fusion power. Instead, they'd encountered organized military resistance, creative tactical thinking, and a level of stubbornness the collective hadn't seen in millennia. The archive documented 6 major engagements. The collective had won 4 of them. Humanity had won 2. But the victories came at such high cost that the collective command had made an unprecedented decision. They'd retreated. Earth was placed under quarantine, a warning beacon marking humanity as too costly to integrate through military means. The collective had decided to wait, to watch, and to approach humanity more carefully when the time was right. Marcus stared at the holographic display, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. For 200 years, Earth had been under alien observation. For 200 years, the collective had been planning and waiting. And when they'd finally made peaceful contact 30 years ago, humanity had welcomed them with open arms. The recent peace treaty, Earth's integration into galactic society, human membership in the collective. It wasn't diplomacy. It was the completion of a 200-year plan. Marcus felt sick. He thought about all the collective advisors on Earth, the trade agreements, the cultural programs, the technology exchanges. It all seemed so beneficial, so progressive. But every other species in this archive had gone through the same process, and every one of them had eventually disappeared, absorbed into the collective like drops of water in an ocean. His hand trembling, Marcus scrolled to the end of Earth's entry. There was an attachment file marked with a red priority seal. The label read, Integration Contingency Phase Final. The file contained technical schematics for a device called a compliance cascade. The description was in cold, clinical language, but the purpose was clear. The device would be deployed on worlds that refused voluntary integration. It would broadcast a signal that suppressed aggressive behavior and increased suggestibility. It was a mind control weapon, and according to the construction schedule in the file, it was being built right now. The location was listed as Luna 1, Earth's moon. Marcus stood up, his heart pounding. He looked around the chamber at the thousands of holographic displays documenting civilizations that had resisted and failed. He was just one human. One broke salvage dealer with no connections, no power, and no way to fight something as vast as the collective. But he had something no one else had. He had the truth. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He sat in the hidden chamber, surrounded by holographic displays, reading everything he could find about Earth's first contact with the collective. The more he read, the more horrified he became. The archive was detailed, frighteningly detailed. It contained battle reports, strategic analyses, and even personal journals from collective commanders who'd fought against humanity in 1823. Marcus read them all, his cheap translator working overtime to convert the ancient text. Commander Velrith's journal, dated Earth year 1823, 3rd month. Standard protocol suggested a demonstration of force, followed by negotiations with local leaders. We anticipated completion within one solar rotation. We were wrong. The humans met our landing forces with organized resistance. Their weapons were crude, chemical propellants and sharpened metal, but their tactics were sophisticated. They used terrain expertly. They refused to surrender even when outnumbered. Most disturbing, they adapted to our strategies within days. We destroyed their coastal settlement to demonstrate our superiority. They rebuilt it and attacked our forward base. We destroyed 3 of their cities. They evacuated the populations and turned the ruins into traps. I have fought in 17 integration campaigns. I have never encountered resistance like this. The locations made Marcus's skin crawl. He recognized the names. Portsmouth, England; Guangzhou, China; Veracruz, Mexico. Each battle had been explained away in human history books as natural disasters, strange weather events, or mass hallucinations. The Great Coastal Storm of 1823, the Guangzhou Fire, the Veracruz earthquake, they'd all been collective attacks, and humanity had fought back without even understanding what they were fighting against. To the people of 1823, the collective ships must have seemed like demons or divine punishment, but they'd fought anyway. The turning point came at a battle near Edinburgh, Scotland. A collective landing force of 300 soldiers had been ambushed by Scottish Highlanders using nothing but muskets, swords, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. The collective force had been completely wiped out. Commander Velrith's final journal entry was dated 6 months after the campaign began. We have lost 9 ships, 400 soldiers, and countless resources fighting a species that shouldn't even be able to see our vessels properly. The humans possess no technological advantage. Their weapons are primitive. Their civilization is fragmented. By all strategic calculations, they should have surrendered within weeks. Yet they do not surrender. They do not flee. They do not break. They simply refuse to stop fighting. Command has designated SATA-III as a quarantine world. We will monitor from a distance and wait for them to develop sufficient technology to appreciate our superiority. Perhaps in 200 years, when they reach the stars themselves, they will be ready to join the collective peacefully. I hope never to fight humans again. There is something fundamentally wrong with a species that treats impossible odds as a minor inconvenience. The event had been erased from history, explained away, forgotten by everyone except the collective. And now, 200 years later, the collective had returned, not with warships but with trade agreements and friendship treaties. Earth had joined the collective willingly, thinking they were entering galactic society as equals. But they weren't equals. They were targets. Patient, long-term targets. Marcus looked at the schematic for the compliance cascade again. The device was massive, an orbital station disguised as a research facility. According to the timeline, construction had begun 3 years ago. It was scheduled for activation in 6 months. Once activated, the device would broadcast continuously, affecting every human on Earth. Within a generation, humanity would lose its fighting spirit. Within 2 generations, humans would be just another collective species, indistinguishable from all the others. Marcus stood and paced the small chamber. His footsteps echoed off the walls. What could he do? He was nobody. Just a broke salvage dealer who'd made a stupid bid at an auction. He couldn't go to Earth's government. The archive made it clear that collective advisors were already embedded in every major government on Earth. They'd either ignore him or make him disappear. He couldn't go to the media. The collective controlled most major communication networks. Any story he tried to publish would be labeled as conspiracy theory and buried. He couldn't even trust other humans. How many people on Earth were already working for the collective, knowingly or unknowingly? Marcus stopped pacing and looked at the archive. Thousands of holographic displays floated around him, each one documenting a species that had resisted and failed. But there was something else in the archive, something he'd noticed earlier but hadn't fully understood. He searched through the displays until he found what he was looking for. It was a section labeled Resistance Analysis Successful Tactics. It contained detailed analyses of every successful resistance strategy ever used against the collective: guerrilla warfare tactics, communication networks, supply chain disruption, political resistance, cultural preservation techniques. It was all here. Every trick, every strategy, every desperate gambit that had ever worked against the collective, compiled into one comprehensive guide. And then Marcus understood something crucial. This archive wasn't created by the collective. The collective would never document their own weaknesses so thoroughly. They would never create a manual for resisting their power. Someone else had made this archive. Someone who'd been conquered by the collective. Someone who'd hidden it on the Dominion's crown, hoping that someday someone would find it and use it. This wasn't just a historical record. This was a weapon. Marcus sat down and began copying files. His personal datapad had limited storage, but he downloaded everything he could: battle reports, strategic analyses, the schematics for the compliance cascade, and most importantly, the section on successful resistance tactics. As he worked, he noticed something else. According to the archive, 43 species had used similar resistance archives before their final integration. The previous archive keepers had tried to spread information, to warn others to fight back. They'd all failed, but Marcus realized they'd all made the same mistake. They'd tried to fight the collective directly. They'd organized rebellions, formed resistance movements, and launched military campaigns. The collective was prepared for that. They'd been dealing with military resistance for thousands of years. But what if someone tried a different approach? What if someone used the collective's own patience against them? Marcus thought about humanity's hidden war in 1823. What had made humans so effective wasn't superior technology or military genius. It was stubbornness. It was the refusal to accept defeat. It was the annoying human habit of treating impossible situations as merely difficult ones. Commander Velrith had been right. There was something fundamentally different about humans. Not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they were too stubborn to know when they should quit. An idea began forming in Marcus's mind. It was crazy. It was probably impossible. But it was also the most human plan anyone could possibly conceive. He wouldn't try to stop the collective. He wouldn't organize a resistance movement or start a war. He wouldn't even try to convince people that the collective was dangerous. Instead, he would do something the collective would never expect. He would embarrass them. Marcus pulled up the files on the compliance cascade and studied the schematics carefully. The device was sophisticated, but it wasn't hidden. It was disguised as the Luna Research Initiative, a publicly announced scientific facility. The collective had hidden it in plain sight, confident that humans wouldn't understand what they were looking at. But Marcus understood, and more importantly, he could prove it. He continued downloading files, his mind racing. The collective had spent 200 years planning Earth's integration. They'd infiltrated governments, established trade networks, and built their mind control device right under humanity's nose. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated how much humans hated being manipulated. Marcus had seen it countless times in his own life. Tell a human they can't do something, they'll try it. Tell them something is impossible, they'll prove you wrong. Tell them they're being controlled, and they'll burn everything down just to spite you. The collective didn't understand that. They thought patience and careful planning would work on humans like it had on every other species. They were about to learn differently. Marcus finished downloading the last file and stood up. His datapad was full, containing enough evidence to prove everything. The 1823 invasion, the 200-year plan, the mind control device on the moon. It was all here, documented in the collective's own records. Now he just needed to figure out how to share it with 8 billion humans without getting caught. He looked around the chamber one last time. The holographic displays still floated in the air, showing the tragic history of species that had resisted and failed. But Marcus didn't feel discouraged. Those species had fought the collective's way with military force and organized resistance. Marcus was going to fight the human way. He was going to make the collective wish they'd never heard of Earth. As he climbed back through the hidden corridor toward the upper decks of the Dominion's crown, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The collective had patience. They had technology. They had resources and power beyond imagination. But they didn't have 8 billion stubborn, creative, and thoroughly annoyed humans who just learned they'd been manipulated for 200 years. This was going to be interesting. Marcus spent the next 2 days planning. Not a military plan or a political strategy, but something much simpler and far more dangerous. He was going to tell everyone everything. The problem was figuring out how to do it without getting caught before the information spread. The collective monitored major communication networks. They had advisors in every government. They controlled most news agencies and could suppress stories before they even aired. But Marcus had one advantage. He understood how information actually spread in the modern age, and it had nothing to do with official channels. He set up his equipment in the empty cargo bay of the Dominion's crown. His personal datapad, a cheap holographic projector he'd bought for salvage presentations, and a camera drone he'd used to document shipwrecks. Not sophisticated equipment, but it would work. Marcus started recording. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a salvage dealer, and 3 days ago I bought this ship at a government auction for 500 credits. He gestured around the empty cargo bay. Everyone told me it was worthless. They were wrong. This ship is the Dominion's Crown, a collective military vessel. Inside, I found a hidden archive, a database containing thousands of years of collective military history. And what I found is going to change everything you think you know about Earth's relationship with the collective. He explained the 200-year integration plan. He showed the schematics for the compliance cascade. He presented everything in simple, clear language. No conspiracy theories, no wild accusations, just facts backed by documentation from the collective's own records. When he finished, he had a 6-hour video file filled with undeniable evidence. Now came the hard part. Marcus couldn't just upload this to the public networks. The collective would detect it immediately and shut it down. He needed the information to spread faster than they could suppress it. He thought about the problem for hours, pacing the empty corridors of the Dominion's Crown. How did information really spread? Not through official news channels or government announcements. It spread through people sharing it with other people, one connection at a time. Then Marcus remembered something. Before he'd become a salvage dealer, he'd worked at an entertainment distribution company. He'd learned about viral marketing, content distribution, and most importantly, how to game recommendation algorithms. A plan formed in his mind. It was ridiculous. It was probably illegal, but it might actually work. Marcus divided his 6-hour video into smaller segments. He edited each segment differently, adding different titles, descriptions, and tags. He created multiple versions of each segment with slightly different content. Then he began uploading, not to news sites or official channels. He uploaded to entertainment platforms, education sites, gaming forums, and social media networks. He disguised the segments as different types of content, documentaries, video essays, historical analyses, even conspiracy theory discussions. He used automation tools to create thousands of fake accounts across hundreds of platforms. Each account uploaded different segments to different sites. Some accounts presented the information as serious historical research. Others treated it as science fiction speculation. Some even mocked it as obviously fake conspiracy nonsense. Marcus worked for 18 straight hours, uploading, tagging, and distributing his content across the entire human internet. He used every trick he'd learned about recommendation algorithms, search optimization, and content discovery. By the time he finished, pieces of his video were scattered across 10,000 different sites, tagged in 100 different ways, accessible through countless different searches. Then he waited. The first day, nothing happened. His videos got a few dozen views each. Marcus sat in the cargo bay, refreshing his analytics, watching the numbers slowly tick upward. On the second day, something changed. A popular history channel had found one of his segments about the 1823 battles. They'd created a response video, analyzing the evidence and declaring it surprisingly well-researched for a conspiracy theory. Their video got 20,000 views. Then a gaming streamer found the archive footage and used it as background material for a science fiction game stream. 100,000 people watched. A university professor stumbled across the battle reports and wrote a blog post examining their historical accuracy. The post went viral in academic circles. Marcus watched the view counts multiply. 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. The information was spreading organically, shared by people who found it interesting, debated by skeptics, analyzed by experts. The collective couldn't suppress it. There was no single source to shut down. The information was everywhere, being shared and discussed and debated by millions of people across hundreds of platforms. On the third day, mainstream news agencies started covering the story. Not because they believed it, but because so many people were talking about it that they couldn't ignore it anymore. Viral video claims hidden alien history, the headlines read. Salvage dealer's wild documentary divides internet. But people kept watching, they kept sharing, they kept discussing. Marcus monitored the response carefully. He'd expected skepticism, that was fine. He'd even expected ridicule. What mattered was that people were looking at the evidence. They were examining the archive footage, studying the battle reports, analyzing the compliance cascade schematics, and some of them were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. Why did the Luna Research Initiative use the exact power configuration shown in the leaked schematics? Why were there no independent inspections of the facility? Why had the collective been so insistent on building it, offering to fund the entire project themselves? On the fourth day, investigative journalists started digging deeper. A reporter from the independent Earth News Network managed to trace the Luna Research Initiative's construction contracts. She found irregularities, components that didn't match the official facility description, energy systems far beyond what a research station would need. Another journalist interviewed elderly people from Portsmouth, England. Some of them remembered family stories about the Great Coastal Storm of 1823, stories that didn't match the official historical record. Stories about strange lights in the sky and soldiers who fought against invisible enemies. The story was growing beyond Marcus's control, taking on a life of its own. People were adding their own research, their own discoveries, their own questions. Then, on the fifth day, everything exploded. Someone hacked into the Luna Research Initiative's construction database. Marcus never found out who. The hacker used anonymous networks and left no trace, but they dumped the entire database onto the public internet. The construction records matched the compliance cascade schematics perfectly. Every component, every system, every power coupling, identical to the device described in the archive. There was no way to deny it anymore. The evidence was overwhelming. Earth's government demanded an explanation. The collective advisors gave calm responses about misunderstandings and security protocols, but their explanations contradicted the documentation. Their reassurances conflicted with the physical evidence. People stopped trusting them. Protests erupted outside collective embassy buildings. Governments that had been cooperating fully with the collective suddenly started asking difficult questions. Trade agreements were suspended. Cultural exchange programs were halted. The carefully constructed integration plan was falling apart. Marcus watched it all from the Dominion's crown, monitoring news feeds and social media. He'd started something that was now completely beyond his control. The information was everywhere. It couldn't be stopped or suppressed or explained away, but he'd also started something dangerous. On the sixth day, someone came looking for him. Marcus was in the cargo bay when his proximity alarms triggered. A ship was approaching the Dominion's crown, a sleek vessel with collective markings. His heart started racing. He'd known this would happen eventually. The collective would trace the leaked information back to its source. They'd find him. Marcus grabbed his datapad and ran. He didn't have weapons or defenses. The Dominion's crown was a dead ship with no operational systems except emergency power. But it was also massive. 800 meters of corridors, rooms, and hiding places. Marcus descended into the lower decks, moving through the darkness with only his headlamp for light. He could hear sounds echoing through the empty ship, footsteps, voices, the hum of scanning equipment. They were searching for him. He made his way to the hidden chamber, the one place on the ship that wasn't on any official schematic. He sealed himself inside and waited, listening to the sounds of the search getting closer. Then he heard a voice, not harsh or threatening, but calm and almost sad. "Marcus Webb, we know you're here. We've been monitoring your broadcasts. Very clever, using distributed networks to prevent suppression. You understand human communication systems better than we anticipated. You've done considerable damage to our integration timeline. Decades of careful work, undermined by one stubborn human and a database that should have been destroyed millennia ago. But you've also given us valuable information. You've shown us that humans are exactly what Commander Velrith reported 200 years ago. Stubborn, creative, utterly unwilling to accept defeat. The question now, Marcus Webb, is what happens next. Do you continue fighting, knowing the collective has resources and time beyond your comprehension? Or do you negotiate? Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd exposed, it all came down to this moment. The voice spoke again, softer now. We're not here to harm you, Marcus. We're here to offer you a choice. Come out and talk with us. Or stay hidden and wonder what might have been possible. But what if they were telling the truth? What if there was a way to negotiate? He thought about Commander Velrith's journal, about the collective's frustration with human stubbornness, about 200 years of careful planning undermined in less than a week. Maybe the collective was ready to talk because they'd finally realized something important. Humans didn't follow the same patterns as other species. They couldn't be conquered through patience or force. They could only be met as equals. Marcus took a deep breath and made his decision. Marcus stood up and opened the hidden chamber door. 3 figures waited in the corridor outside. 2 were collective security officers in dark uniforms, their faces hidden behind helmets. The third was different, an elderly being with pale blue skin and 4 arms, wearing simple robes that seemed to shimmer in the emergency lighting. "Mr. Webb," the robed figure said, inclining its head, "thank you for joining us. My name is Counselor Thane. I speak for the Collective Integration Council." "May we?" Without waiting for an answer, the counselor moved past Marcus into the room. Marcus followed reluctantly. The security officers remained in the corridor. Inside the chamber, the archive was still active. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing records of conquered species and failed resistance movements. Counselor Thane studied them with what looked like sadness. "The Archive of Sorrows," the counselor said quietly. "We've been searching for this for 3,000 years. Every few centuries, it appears on a different derelict ship, always in the hands of someone who thinks they can use it to resist us. A member of the first species the collective ever conquered, the Viridian Unity." Thane touched one of the displays gently. "They created this archive as a warning to future species, a comprehensive guide to resisting the collective. We want to understand why it never works." Thane turned to face Marcus. 43 species have possessed this archive. 43 groups of brave resistance fighters who thought this information would save them. They all failed. Do you know why? Because they fought us the way they thought they should fight. Military resistance, political movements, armed rebellion. The archive gave them tactics and strategies, but it couldn't give them what they really needed. Thane paused. It couldn't give them a reason not to give up. "We've read your history, analyzed your culture, examined your psychology, and we've reached a conclusion that troubles many in the collective leadership." Thane moved closer. "Humans cannot be integrated. Not through force, not through patience, not through any method we've successfully used on other species. We negotiate." Thane pulled out a device and projected a holographic document into the air between them. "This is a revised treaty, equal partnership, not integration. Humanity maintains complete autonomy. The Luna Research Initiative will be dismantled under independent inspection. All collective advisors currently embedded in Earth governments will be recalled." "Webb, and your ridiculous, brilliant plan." Thane actually smiled. "You didn't try to fight us militarily. You didn't organize a resistance movement. You simply told everyone the truth and let human nature do the rest. Every species in this database tried to fight us in ways we understood, ways we could counter, but you humans, you turned our integration plan into entertainment. into memes, into jokes. About the thousands of comedy videos mocking the collective, the songs people had written, the artwork, the satire. I've been monitoring your internet, Thane continued. Do you know what the most popular response to our integration plan has been? Not anger, not fear, mockery. Humans are making fun of us. They're creating parody videos of collective advisors. They're writing comedy sketches about the mind control device. Someone created a video game where players try to avoid being integrated. It's actually pretty fun. Thane waited patiently for him to finish. You see our problem. We can counter military resistance. We can outlast political movements, but we cannot fight ridicule. We cannot suppress humor. And we absolutely cannot integrate a species that treats our most sophisticated plans as comedy material. This is us learning. Humanity will join the collective as equal partners, not subordinates. You'll maintain your independence, your culture, your annoying habit of making jokes about everything. But he'd learned not to trust appearances. What's the catch? Who better than the human who figured out how to use it effectively? Thane's expression became serious. This archive represents thousands of years of suffering, Marcus. Species that fought and lost, cultures that were erased. We want someone to remember them, to make sure their resistance meant something. Why me? Resistance isn't about defeating your enemy. It's about refusing to be defeated, and you humans excel at that. About the desperate plan that had somehow worked. I have one condition, he said finally. Name it. That will cause problems. Many species will be angry to learn their histories were suppressed. Time to prove it. Wonderful, Thane said dryly. I look forward to seeing how you portray us. The Luna facility would be dismantled immediately, with human inspectors monitoring every step. The archive would be transferred to a public database, accessible to anyone in the galaxy. As for Marcus, he would receive a salary to maintain and study the archive. He would also keep the Dominion's crown as a museum and research facility. When the negotiations were finished, Thane prepared to leave. At the chamber entrance, the counselor paused. Marcus Webb, may I ask you something personal? I was thinking I was making the worst financial decision of my life. I suspect the galaxy is going to find humanity exhausting. Tour shuttles arrived daily, bringing visitors from Earth and dozens of other worlds. Marcus stood in the main exhibition hall, what used to be the empty cargo bay. Now it was filled with holographic displays, artifact cases, and interactive presentations. The Archive of Sorrows had become the centerpiece of the museum, its data freely accessible to anyone who wanted to learn. A group of school children ran past, laughing and pointing at the battle reconstructions. Their teacher was explaining the 1823 invasion, showing them how their ancestors had fought off ships they couldn't even fully see. They made it into a holiday, a familiar voice said behind him. Marcus turned to find Thane standing in the doorway. The counselor looked tired but not unhappy. Resistance Day, Marcus said, celebrated on the anniversary of the Edinburgh battle. There's going to be parades. Very tasteful. Turns out a lot of species are interested in learning their real histories. Marcus pulled up statistics on his datapad. We've also had 47 academic papers published analyzing the archive, 3 documentary series, and yes, 1 extremely popular streaming show. Very sympathetic character. The Collective Council is reforming, Thane said quietly. We're implementing transparency requirements. Historical records can no longer be suppressed. Species maintain autonomy unless they specifically vote for integration. Half the collective is furious. The other half is demanding even more reforms. Your ridiculous stunt has created bureaucratic nightmares that will take decades to resolve. Do all humans enjoy creating problems this much? It's kind of our thing. He thought about Commander Velrith's journal, about the commander's frustrated observation that humans treated impossible odds as minor inconveniences. "Counselor Thane," Marcus said, "can I tell you something?" They made the collective work harder, think differently, question themselves. They changed things even in defeat. That's not victory. That's just very, very fortunate stupidity. Even if you did it with memes and comedy videos. Outside the viewport, Earth hung in space, beautiful, chaotic, and stubbornly independent. The compliance cascade had been dismantled. The integration plan had been abandoned. Humanity had joined the galactic community on its own terms. And it had all started because one broke salvage dealer had made the worst investment of his life. Marcus smiled and went back to work. The archive had 8,000 years of history to catalog, and he had all the time in the world. Well, all the time in the world and 40 million people waiting for the next update to Compliance Cascade, the game.